So I'm just going to talk you through some of the tools that you might use on your group sessions for various different tasks, and a little bit about the health and safety associated with those tools. So you're going to be using a range of tools across the different tasks you're going to be doing in your park. But first of all, we'll focus on as if you're doing some scrub clearance. And the kind of things you'll be using when you're doing your scrub clearance, most people will be familiar with, is your secateurs. Now, when selecting your tools, it's always worth just checking the tools yourself, but also just getting whoever's going to be using those tools to check they're happy with the condition of those tools before they use them. So check the secateurs are all firm and safe to use, and there's no loose bolts or anything like that. When we use secateurs, what we tend to advise people are don't try and prune anything larger than your little finger. That gives you a good gauge of what sort of size foliage to be trying to cut through. And then anything larger than that, what you can do, move up to a pair of loppers. Now a pair of loppers, again, just check that they're all secure and good to use. And then with the loppers, what we say generally is the rule of thumb. When you're cutting back scrub, don't try and cut through anything bigger than the size of your thumb with a pair of loppers. What that does is puts too much pressure on the jaws of the loppers here and makes them pretty hard to use for the next person. So just check you're happy to use those, and if you need to move up to anything that's larger than a pair of loppers, what we have is something like a pruning saw like this. Now pruning saws are what we call pull saw, so they only cut on the pull strokes. It's very important to advise people to release the pressure when pushing forward, but also keep hands away from these. These are very sharp and can cause a lot of small, just minor injuries on fingers and things like that. And one thing we do tend to advise people when using the pruning saws is have gloves on as well, and that just protects especially your free hand from any little nicks or anything if the saw was to slip. So that's your pruning saw. And some people, depending on the scrub that you're clearing back, some people like to wear eye protection. Some people find it's a bit of a hindrance, but I always like to offer people the choice of wearing eye protection or not, particularly if you're clearing blackthorn, sort of scrubby growth like that that's quite high, and particularly at eye level. I prefer to advise people to wear leather gloves when you're doing scrub clearance. Obviously thorns are an issue, blackthorn particularly this time of year, but also just pulling out brambles, things like that. People will find it a lot easier if they're using leather gloves rather than the rubberized gloves, which I'll come on to in a bit. Always keep a first aid kit handy. And in your introduction to your group, it's very important that you let people know where that first aid is kept. So good to have a first aid box. And if you're going to be doing anything like some sort of weeding tasks or something like that, you may be using tools like this. We've got a hand trowel and a hand fork here. One thing what we try to do with volunteers is just explain as I've done with the loppers and the secateurs, is just at which point you would look to use the next tool up, shall we say. So if you're doing some hand weeding in a bed, something like a hand trowel, a hand fork is your perfect tool really. But as soon as you need to move up and you're trying to dig out roots or anything like that, it's very important to stress that you need to move on to something like a border fork here or a spade, which won't put too much pressure on the smaller hand tools like this. If you're carrying out some coppicing tasks or taking out weed trees or anything like that, what you might find is you're using something like a bow saw. Obviously the loppers are good up to roughly the size of your thumb. If you need to go any bigger than that, then we have a bow saw. Now it's really important when using a bow saw that the hand that is free, you wear a glove on that hand. That's what we advise people, purely because the tendency is to hold whatever it is you're going to cut, and as you're cutting, it's very common for that saw to slip around a bit as well, and it has been known for people to get cuts on the back of their hands. So really important to advise people to put a glove on like this, a leatherized glove, and just protect that free hand. So that's the bow saw.